Thank you. That was amazing. Just lifted us up. Good morning. So on Tuesday, there is a transit of Venus. Now, only 6 have been observed since there have been telescopes around since the 17th century. So this is actually the 7th time that we're going to be witnessing it. In 1882, when it occurred, it was a big deal. It was a big deal all over the world, and in New York, they charged 10 cents apiece to look through a telescope. In fact, it was such a big deal that John Philip Sousa composed a score called The Transit of Venus March. The transits of Venus are about 100 years apart, and they come in pairs 8 years apart. So the last one was in 2004, and now it's 2012, and we won't see another one until 2117 and 2125. So it's a very rare occurrence, and I would tell you to go out and see it, but the forecast is for rain on Tuesday. And I thought, well, you know, we could go to eastern Washington and see it, but the forecast in Yakima and Spokane in Idaho is also for rain, as is Vancouver and Portland. So we can watch it on our computers or our iPhones, I guess. We can look at it that way. Venus and the Sun usually cross over regularly. There are Venus transits, but the difference with this one is that normally Venus is either like kind of above the Sun or below, so you don't really see it. But this time it's directly in front, so you're able to actually see the planet moving across the Sun throughout the evening. Again, if we could see that without rain. But Venus represents love, represents beauty, the arts. I traced some of the previous Venus transits over the last 500 years or so, just to see what happened in those years, if anything significant happened. It was interesting that in one of the years, the first woman circumnavigated the globe. It was the first woman at sea. Venus rules, fashion and arts. Levi Strauss put together the U.S. patent for blue jeans in 1874. And one of the very strange events that happened during one of the Venus transits was in 1518 in Strasbourg. There was a dancing plague. You heard me, a dancing plague. So a woman apparently started spontaneously dancing, and she couldn't stop. And then it just spread throughout the town. And pretty soon 40 people were dancing, and then 200 and 400. And everybody just kept dancing, and they couldn't stop. And the clergy and the physicians at the time were like, uh-oh, what's wrong? What's wrong with everybody? And, that's when they'd put leeches on you and bleed you to get the bad blood out. And they thought, well, these people are just hot-blooded, so we need to encourage their dancing. So they cleared out the marketplace for people to dance, and the guild halls, and they built a wooden stage, and they hired bands to play like all night. And this went on apparently for 6 days, and a number of people actually died. It was called the dancing plague because they were exhausted, they had heart attacks, they had strokes. They just kept dancing. So hopefully we will not have a dancing plague during this Venus transit. In 1882, Edison and the first power plant lit up 1 mile of Manhattan. So there's kind of interesting revolutionary things that seem to happen during these periods. So I want to look again at the symbolism. Venus represents love. The sun can represent the source of all. I mean, how many thousands of years did we worship the sun? But also the sun can represent the ego. And when we have Venus right in front of the sun, it's like love is in front of the ego. And is it not time for us to start letting go of the ego so that we can make room for the Spirit of God that dwells within? Eckhart Tolle said that your ego is in charge when we're wanting to control events, we're wanting to control other people, or perhaps we're easily offended or easily angered. The ego will protect itself at all costs. When we look at it biblically, John the Baptist represents the intellect. He also can represent the ego. And John the Baptist baptized Jesus into his ministry. And what he said on that day was, I must decrease so that you may increase. In other words, the ego, the intellect needs to begin to release and let go to the presence, to the Spirit of God that dwells within. That must increase. Not that we get rid of it, not that we lose it, but that we join our intellect, this amazing intellect that we have. We join this incredible ego that we have, but we feed it through love, through divine love. Emily Cady, who wrote Lessons in Truth, described these differences as personality and individuality. She said, you may not like someone's personality, but the Christ within, the Spirit of God within, you can never dislike, because it is the Spirit of God. And when we say we don't like somebody, what we're saying is I don't like the personality. I don't like the mask. But the Spirit of God is the individuality that is connected to each other, is connected to God, is connected to one. Jesus said it this way when he said, the kingdom of heaven is in the midst of you. So the thing about the Spirit of God within, the divine presence, the Christ, is it's a difficult thing to describe and to talk about. First of all, it's not even a thing. It's a presence, right? And the only way that we really know it is through experience. Emily Cady called it the secret place of the Most High, because it's one place that we need to go to by ourselves to experience it. So what is that like for you when you experience the presence of God? Do you feel expanded? Do you feel more connected, more loved? I think it is time for our intellect to surrender to love and to the Spirit of God, to be ruled by that, if you will. When I lived at the Shivananda ashram, at the end of our prayers, we always did a ritual and a chant which was called the arati. And it was a chant to the light. And at the end of it, we had a piece of camphor that we would light. And then we would just sing this song, which was to all the gods and the goddesses, all the beings of light. And we would continue to do this until the camphor burned out, and the camphor would always disappear. And the symbology behind it was that the ego is being burned off. The ego is being released. And we ended each prayer session by prostrating ourselves on the floor and touching our third eye to the floor. And it was a way to surrender. And And we did this twice a day. And twice a day, I would feel myself surrender my ego, surrender my life to something higher. I would surrender everything to the presence of God. In our culture, we're not used to prostrating. We don't necessarily get on the floor and put our head down. We don't bow. We don't do stuff like that, right? Because we're Americans, you know? Chest out. And yet it symbolizes that willingness to release, that willingness to be a servant, the willingness to have Venus rule. I think when I look at the words of Paul from 1 Corinthians 13, he's describing the difference between the ego and love. He's describing the difference between the personality and individuality. He's describing the difference between the Spirit of God within and the personal identification. He says, I know many of us know this verse, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but I do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. is not a resounding gong and a clanging cymbal. That's the ego, right? Blah, blah, blah. It's really loud. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Who envies? The ego. It does not boast. Who boasts? The ego. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Who gets easily angered? It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes, and it always perseveres. If I didn't know better, I would say that Paul was describing the Venus transit. He said, love never fails. When I was a child, in other words, unawakened, connected, only living from the ego, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. We'll see clearly. We'll see the masks are off. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I think right now we are seeing the opposite seeming to manifest in our world. We're seeing more of the ego than of divine love. I heard there was a book that came out a couple months ago, and the book was about the premise that violence has actually dwindled. It has decreased over the years. But I wonder if the book takes into account this year and last year, because I think if we look at the stats, it looks the opposite right now. With the shootings in Seattle this week, it marks the 21st homicide-related death in Seattle, and it passes last year's total. That's how many we had all last year, and we still have 6 months to go. So we see the ego, easily angered, quick to make a move, quick to violence. And I believe that, you know, when John the Baptist says, I must decrease, so he must increase, we must be willing to surrender to the divine higher power. And I know that love prevails all the time as well, and we see it even in the situation that happened this week. The woman who was shot at 8th and Seneca earlier this week was surrounded by 2 women. And the 2 women took turns giving her CPR. And one of them said to her, whoever you are, we are here. You are not alone. And they stayed with her. And she said, it was like I was in a cocoon with this woman I'd never met and another woman I'd never met. And she's dying. They found themselves in this surreal experience. And yet, these 2 women showed up to love and to serve and to be there. And that's what we're called to be and to do. So we talk a lot about God within, the divine presence, the Christ, the Spirit of God, and yet, do we get to practice it? We practice it perhaps in our meditation time, in our prayer time, where we begin to feel bigger than our bodies, more than who we are. But do we get to practice it with each other? Do we get to see that Spirit of God within each other? It's what Emily Cady was talking about when she said the personality versus the individuality, the ability to look beyond the outer appearance, the hair color, the body size, the skin color, the clothes, and to look into that spirit and that presence. The word namaste means that I behold the Spirit of God in you. We're doing community this year. And so I would like for us to practice that only with 3 people. And so the way we begin this is I invite you, just turn your attention within, if you would, and touch the divine presence within you, whatever that feels like, looks like. Perhaps you connect to it through your breath. Know that you are more than your body. You're more than the soul. You are a spiritual being. And what I would like us to do as we open our eyes in a moment is to just stand up and to put our hands in the prayer position. And I'd like you to quietly walk up to at least 3 people, not saying a word, looking into their eyes and seeing beyond the outer appearance into the Spirit of God, and then just simply say, Namaste, and bow. You're always free not to do any of this, but to sit quietly. So please stand up. And just find 3 different people, one at a time. Thank you for doing that. We don't have many opportunities in our lives, other than with our intimate other, to stop and to really look. And I think that's what the world is calling from us right now. So as we move into this celebration of the Venus transit, we recognize also that Venus not only is the goddess of beauty, love, and grace, but she's also Aphrodite. She is the archetype. Carl Jung said she was the archetype of connection and community. And so I believe what's happening is the feminine, holistic mind is joining with the masculine, archetypal mind, which creates a new mind and a global heart. Kathy Pagano said, with Venus, we have to recognize that one of the forms of peaceful revolution comes through the arts, which can change people's minds quicker than arguments. We cannot attain transformation with violence anymore. It won't work. What we can do is let Venus have her say, as she is traversing the face of the sun, making us conscious of the fact that her energy can stand before the light of consciousness. Her energy can stand before the light of consciousness. I think it's interesting. It's almost like the return of the goddess is happening, right? And I think it's interesting that the Queen of England is celebrating her Diamond Jubilee year. And one of the ways that they're celebrating it in England is they are having beacons of light, bonfires. And their goal is to have 2012 bonfires tomorrow, which moves into the transit of Venus. And I think, how synchronistic is that? I mean, imagine, if we were pagans and we were living years and years ago and we wanted to celebrate this Venus transit, what would we do? We'd go, hey, I know, let's have a bunch of bonfires. That sounds like fun. That would work. Well, hey, the Queen's doing it for us, England's doing it for us. So the sun also represents the life force, the source, and we align with that source of love. Venus represents agape, eros, filio, or the divine love, friendship, and romance. How wonderful it is to be in a place where we can combine and live with all 3 and celebrate all 3, where we celebrate the divine presence, we celebrate the community, and we celebrate eros, like in a wedding.